We have to protect independent journalism, which is why I was so concerned when I went last November to Canada. I was going to speak at the Vancouver Public Library. Actually, we were on the book tour for Breaking the Sound Barrier, and well, it was Thanksgiving time, so we figured while you were all eating turkey, we would go to Canada where they don't celebrate Thanksgiving then to talk turkey. So we were at the Seattle SeaTac Airport, Seattle-Tacoma Airport, and then we were driving up to the Vancouver Public Library to give a talk. 3 community radio stations there run democracy now. And we usually, when we go into town, have a fundraiser for the local media. And we were driving over the border when we got pulled over. Now, you always have to stop and show your passports, that's routine. We were concerned though when they told us to get out, not just because it was pouring rain outside, but to go into the border facility there, huge warehouse facility. We sat down and they called me up and they said, Amy, we want your notes for your talk tonight. And I said, for the talk that I'm going to give at the library? And they said, that's right, we want them now. Now, this is the thing about my talks. I don't really speak from notes. And I said, well, I don't actually speak. We want the notes now. Now, this was serious. You know, the talk was in an hour. I could see I was going to be late. So I went out to the car and I was thinking, what am I going to do? And I had a copy of the book. So I brought it in. There were border guards there. They were armed. I handed one of them the book. One was taking notes in the computer, writing down everything I was saying. One was taking notes by hand, and one was going through now the column book. I said, well, what I usually do is I read excerpts of the columns, and then I sort of riff off them. And they said, what are you going to say? So I said, well, tonight I said I was going to start with the last column in the book. I didn't really plan to give the speech there at the border to the 3 border guards, because it was public. They could come, they could follow me. Not that I wanted them to follow me, but they could come to the talk. I said, interestingly, I was going to start with the last column, which is healthcare reform needs an action hero. And it's about, well, Tommy Douglas. Now, I don't know how many of you know who he was, but he was considered the greatest Canadian. Poll on CBC in 2004 called him that. He was the man who brought single-payer health care, Medicare, as it's known there and here, to everyone in Canada. He was the premier of Saskatchewan. It was the early 60s when we were having our debates on Medicare and Medicaid. And he, as a kid, would have lost his leg, but a doctor said he'd treat him for free. And he always knew how important that was. And he decided that that would be his legacy. And he fought for it in Saskatchewan. And his main opposition, believe it or not, was the American Medical Association in the United States. He was trying to do this in Canada. Why were they opposed, the AMA? Well, they were afraid the contagion would spread south. And they led a 23-day strike of Canadian doctors against Medicare. But Tommy Douglas won. Medicare was first adopted in Saskatchewan, and then immediately was immediately adopted throughout Canada. So that's, I said to the guards, what I was going to be talking about. I said, my goodness, you're detaining me at the border, and here Sarah Palin has come over to attack your healthcare system, and she can travel freely throughout Canada. But anyway, so the way I started this column, imagine the scene. America, 2009, 18,000 people have died in a year, an average of almost 50 a day. Who's taking them out? What's killing them? To investigate, President Barack Obama might be tempted to call on Jack Bauer, the fictional rogue intelligence agent from the hit TV series 24, who invariably employs torture and a host of other illegal tactics to help the president fight terrorism. But terrorism isn't the culprit here. It's lack of adequate health care. So maybe the president's solution isn't Jack Bauer, but the actor who plays him. The star of 24 is played by Kiefer Sutherland, whose family has very deep connections to healthcare reform, in Canada, that is. Sutherland is the grandson of the late Tommy Douglas, the pioneering Canadian politician credited with creating the modern Canadian healthcare system. Then I talk all about, what Tommy Douglas did. And Then go back to Kiefer Sutherland, because, I mean, he has a big right-wing audience in the United States. Imagine if he spoke out. For example, Rush Limbaugh, Fox News Channel's Glenn Beck, and insurance industry-funded groups are encouraging people to disrupt town hall meetings with members of Congress. You remember the number of confrontations becoming violent or at least threatening. Outside President Obama's Portsmouth, New Hampshire event, a protester with a pistol strapped to his thigh drew further attention with a sign that read, "It's time to water the tree of liberty." Thomas Jefferson's complete quote, not included on the sign, continues with the blood of tyrants and patriots. Rush Limbaugh says 24 is one of his favorite shows. He's even visited the set. He should learn from the real-life actor who plays his hero, Jack. Limbaugh and his cohorts might find truth not as satisfying as fiction. And then I talk about Tommy Douglas, who was named the greatest Canadian. At a protest in 2000 against efforts to roll back the Medicare system in the province of Alberta, Kiefer Sutherland defended Canada's public single-payer system. Kiefer spoke out at a rally in Canada. He said, "Private health care doesn't work. America is trying to change their system. It's too expensive to get comprehensive medical care in the US. Why on earth are we going to follow their system here?" Kiefer Sutherland said, "I consider it a humanitarian issue. This is an issue about what is right and wrong, what is decent and what is not. Maybe Jack Bauer can save the day," I said to the Canadian Border Guards. They said, "What else are you going to talk about?" I said, "Well," and now it's late. Dennis Moynihan was with me. I was asking, can you call the head librarian at the Vancouver Public Library? Maybe you can bring the Canadians here. I don't know. I could give the talk to everyone. Thank goodness, by the way, for Canadians, because they all went out for a beer and came back a couple hours later to hear the talk. But that's giving it away. Then you'll get the sense that I actually made it there. And I eventually did, but not before they said, "What else are you going to talk about?" So I said, "Well, I'm going to talk about global warming. It's a very serious issue." "What else are you talking about?" they said. "I'm going to talk about the global economic meltdown. You must have felt that here," I said to the guards, typing, writing, one is reading. "What else are you talking about?" I said, "Well, I will probably talk about," and I thought maybe this is the trigger, I will talk about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. "What else are you talking about?" the guard said. I said, "Well, that about sums it up. It's only an hour talk." And he said, "Are you denying that you're going to be talking about the Olympics?" Now, anyone who knows me knows, like, I don't really go in for organized sports too much, not as a spectator. I like to play sports. I'm sorry to say this in an arena here, but no, I actually I used to go with my father to watch basketball games when I was growing up, especially in high school, so I really loved to watch basketball, but I didn't exactly even know what he was talking about. So I looked at him, I said, "You mean when President Obama went to Copenhagen to try to get the Olympics in Chicago?" Now remember, this was in Thanksgiving time. And so he said, "You didn't get those Olympics." I said, "I know we didn't get those." I said, "You mean the real Olympics?" And he said, "I'm talking about the Vancouver Olympics." This was not exactly on my radar, and I looked completely shocked, which made him absolutely believe that I was lying. I said, "The Vancouver Olympics?" I don't know if I offended his sense of pride. I said, "Why would I talk about the Vancouver?" That did it. He told me to sit down. They went out to the car, and they went through everything in the car. They went through our notes. They opened our computers. When I went out to check on them, they were going through our computers. They came back in. They called me in the back room, and these guards took these photographs of me, 4 photographs, as well as of my colleagues, and they stapled documents in my passport, each of our passports. I said I didn't know that we needed a visa to come to Canada, and they said, "These are control documents," and I opened them, and it said I had to be out of Canada within 48 hours. So we made it to Vancouver a few hours late, got to the library. Now it was packed, and I really hadn't been planning to talk about the Olympics. But now, of course, it did become the subject of my questions, because I didn't know much about them. And it became a top story in Canada, American journalist detained at the border. You know, then everyone was following me through Canada. That 48 hours, I was rushing to the University of Victoria and to various talks I was going to give. CBC, Toronto Globe and Mail, the Toronto Sun, all of them following as I went and demanding to know of the border guards what was the issue. But then I learned, because as these stories were the top news stories, I saw on CBC after the story about my detention was the story about the Vancouver City Council and how they had passed legislation that they were going to have to retract that said if you had a sign in your home window against the Olympics, your house could be raided. You couldn't speak out against the corporations that were sponsoring the Olympics. Athletes were not allowed to speak critically of corporations that were sponsoring the Olympics. So this was becoming a big issue of freedom of speech, freedom of the press. And I appreciate coming here to Eau Claire and hearing that, well, unfortunately, I just missed this very interesting exercise today. How many of you engaged in it, where the students, gave people free lunch if you would give up your free speech? And a very interesting concept, who ate lunch there and who chose not to. But I like that. I mean, it's a very creative way to deal with an absolutely critical issue. So I learned all about what was going on in the crackdown of free speech. So of course we went back to New York, and on that following Monday, our whole show was devoted to the Vancouver Olympics. I don't like to credit the border guards, the state, with determining our stories, but I have to say they did clue me in, and I appreciate that. And we then intensively covered the Olympics from that point on. But this is a real serious violation. I mean, they were compromising our sources, going through our notes. We have to protect freedom of the press to protect a democratic society. You know what Thomas Jefferson said. If he had a choice between a government without newspapers and newspapers without a government, he would choose the latter. He would choose the newspapers without a government. There's a reason why our profession is the only one explicitly protected by the US Constitution, because we're supposed to be the check and balance on power. It is that serious.